This is Cincinnati's first and only all-local morning news. Fox 19 Morning News. First for news.
And no one has sparked more controversy about John Lennon's death than Ken Geringer. We're going to talk with him coming up live on the Fox 19 Morning News. He has a new book out. It's available in bookstores. He will also be at a book signing at Newport-on-the-Levee. We'll tell you about that. Much more coming up.
A lot of behind-the-scenes stories about rock stars.
In fact, he has his hands on a recording. It's from a recording rehearsal. And on the tape, you hear John Lennon and Paul McCartney.
Is that amazing?
Yeah, we're going to play that for you and get his insight coming up with the Fox 19 Morning News.
As we continue, we will talk with an author who has knowledge of the backroom business deals in the rock and roll world in the 1970s and 80s. Should be really interesting.
Plus, we're going to talk live with the man who has the scoop on Yoko Ono, Aerosmith, Mick Jagger. Also on John Lennon. He gives you some insight and takes you, I think, to the back room, something you wouldn't normally see.
Yeah.
That's coming up on the Fox 19 Morning News.
Don't miss it. We'll continue in a moment. It's 8:11.
Our next guest will take you to the backroom business deals in rock and roll of the 1970s and 1980s. He also gives you insight into the lives of a number of musicians, including John Lennon's, in the new book called Nobody Told Me. The book's author, Ken Geringer, is our guest this morning. Ken, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Rob.
First of all, let's talk about the name of the title. Where'd you get it from?
Well, Nobody Told Me is a John Lennon song. I wanted the book to be a tribute to John Lennon and to his record producer, Jack Douglas.
And Jack Douglas actually gave you some information that is actually really, really insightful into John Lennon's life. If you wanted to be a tribute to John Lennon, a lot of people who love John Lennon would say that this book is only sensational, and you say a lot of things in the book about John Lennon that many would view as controversial.
Well, it's not controversial, it's just fact. You know, prior to being 40 years old, John Lennon was very insecure about his life, his music, and he just hated dealing with the outside world. But at 40 years old, he was back in the studio and he was making music again. And the music was coming out great. And he was gaining back his confidence, and he was working with a man who was not only a producer, but a best friend. And he was openly talking to his producer about leaving Yoko Ono.
Really? Yeah, that would surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, well, Yoko was a very controlling woman, and she craved publicity. But John loved Yoko. A man doesn't love a woman the way John loved Yoko. If Yoko wrote a song, John would hire the best producers, the best writers, anything for her career. But the problem was she showed absolutely no interest when it came to his career.
Sure. You have your hands on a recording that I find really amazing.
Yeah.
Set up that recording for me.
Well, I think the piece that you're going to play is John in 1972 at a rehearsal at Record Plant with the Elephants Memory Band. And during that rehearsal, John's explaining a part to a musician, and he goes, "You got to go down on it. Use your left hand." And he says, "It's got to be simple. Otherwise, Paul couldn't have played it because he could only play basics."
Let's take a listen to that piece from a recording session in 1972.
Well, take the record home and listen. It's something very simple, otherwise Paul couldn't have played it. He can only play, you know, basics. So he must have just rolled down, but his left hand's his right hand. So it might mean you'd have to use your right hand for it, but it's just something like down, down, or something. It's simple. It just always sounds weird to this tape echo. Okay.
And that is amazing.
Yeah, it answers a question. How did John feel about
Paul?
Playing?
Sure.
Yeah.
And that really puts it all out there for you.
Document.
It sure is.
Yeah.
It sure is. And you also run into a lot of other musicians that you give people insight into in your book. Tell me about some of those people.
Two of the groups are Cheap Trick and Aerosmith.
Who are in town this weekend.
I hear they're in town. You know, it's amazing that they're playing together because those guys together are like having the Beatles and the Stones. You got the good guys, Cheap Trick. They play the Beatle rhythms.
Sure.
You know, you got Rick Nielsen playing all those great guitar rhythms, and you got the bad boys of rock and roll. You got Steven Tyler and Aerosmith, the Stones. So you'll never see the Beatles and Stones, but this is the closest thing.
What is the main thing people say to you after reading this book?
They love it. I take them. You know, it started as an underground movement. Kids were. I thought baby boomers were going to pick up on this, but young adults are picking up on it, and they love it.
And the other thing about this is not only is it a story about musicians and their lives, it's also your story as well, which starts off as you running off from home at the age of 14.
Yeah. Well, I've always been fascinated with the written word, but you know, as a young adult, I failed spelling, I failed grammar, and I failed writing. You know, but if not for the fact that I discovered a progressive high school in 1971, where the teachers actually looked past the mechanics of writing and encouraged thoughts and words, this book would have never been written.
Well, I'll tell you this, read Ken's words. The book is called Nobody Told Me. You can actually see Ken at 2 book signings. The first one is tonight in Beaver Creek at the Barnes & Noble there. Of course, that is south of Dayton, probably 40 minutes away from downtown Cincinnati. That's tonight starting at 7. If you live north of town, you can go check that out. Also, there's one a little closer to downtown Cincinnati. It's at the Barnes & Noble tomorrow at Newport on the Levee. The book is called Nobody Told Me by Ken Geringer. Thank you very much for joining us this morning and telling us about your book.
Thank you.
And all the best. Continued success to you.
Pleasure being here.